From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Debt ceiling negotiations hit the skids as President Biden and Republicans tangle over work requirements in government aid programs. Plus, the Supreme Court issues unanimous rulings unchaining the IRS and freeing Silicon Valley from liability for ISIS terrorism. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Kate Batchelder-Odell. The news from the Journal in Washington is that debt ceiling negotiations have now been put on pause. Here is the quote from Speaker Kevin McCarthy in the House. "We've got to get movement by the White House. We don't have the movement yet, so yeah, we're in a pause." Apparently, negotiators took a break on Friday morning with no immediate plans to resume discussions. So, Kim, can you just give us an overview, a sense of where we are? These negotiations seem to be grinding on, and the X date, as they call it, for when this default is supposed to take place just keeps getting closer.
Well, one thing I would just note is how much the White House position and the narrative has changed in the past 10 days. Remember all of those stories out back when Republicans passed their own debt ceiling hike, which included all these savings over the years and various other provisions to deal with the debt and the deficit. The media storyline is that they had no negotiating power and that somehow the White House held all the cards. I'm not quite sure where anyone ever came up with that. But the Democrats seem to have understood, the White House seems to have understood that they don't run all of Congress anymore and that default is a bad thing and that they're going to have to make some concessions. Obviously, the issue is what they are. There seems to be a general agreement among those who are involved of some basic contours. There's obviously going to be some amount of cuts in this bill. There's going to be an attempt to claw back some unspent COVID-related money. The big sticking point right now is work requirements in some welfare programs. The White House had signaled a couple of days ago that it might be willing to go down that road. And by the way, interestingly, if you look at Biden's long history in Congress, he's actually supported some of this in the past. And he drew a huge backlash from liberal Democrats in Congress who completely lost it and expressed to him their great displeasure. I think that that's what's now behind this pause as the White House responds to that backlash and tries to figure out a way it can continue to hold firm on this. But I would note that House Republicans themselves seem fairly firm on this too. So we'll see where things go. The problem we have is that getting to a deal is only the first part. It's then going to take, however notorious, long time to get this through Congress, especially given that the House has certain rules now on how long you have to put a bill out before you can vote on it. And the Senate just is one of the slowest places ever in general.
Kate, you've looked at these work requirement proposals from Republicans. Can you give us an overview of what exactly it is that the GOP wants to do here?
I'd put them in a couple buckets. So the GOP would put work requirements on Medicaid for the first time. That is the low-income health program. There are no work requirements in Medicaid right now. And the program has expanded enormously since the Affordable Care Act passed, and it is now has a lot of enrollment among prime-age men who are above the poverty line, who are out of the workforce. But Kyle, I think we should set Medicaid aside for a moment because the president has said it is off the table, and I think that's regrettable, but that's the political reality of it. And I think we should look at what these other proposals are that Biden could agree on now and have a deal, because I think our listeners would find them quite sensible. So one of them is on food stamps, the nutrition program. There's currently a requirement for 20 hours of work a week part-time for those who are 18 to 49, who are not disabled and who do not have children at home. What the House Republicans want to do is raise that age requirement to 55. Really, that is it. What Republicans also suggest is just tweaking a process so that states can't water the work requirements down with these exemptions. So this is not a massive change. It's a pretty discrete change to apply the work requirement. It's not for parents. It's not for the disabled. The other minor changes, Kyle, are on the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, TANF, product of the 1996 welfare reform. On this program, Kyle, listen to this. Basically, there is a 50% requirement for states that half of their caseload basically needs to be engaged in some kind of work. And it can include things like job training or for a certain amount of time looking for jobs. It's very broad. But states who don't meet that requirement risk losing their federal funding. But at the same time, there are all these ways that you can pay it down, basically. You can spend more state money and pay it down. You get a credit against reducing your caseload. And also, this is my personal favorite, some states basically mail $10 checks to food stamp recipients who are already working and then count them towards working in the TAMP program. I mean, this is just a scam. These are the very modest things, Kyle, that the Republicans want to clean up and try to just enforce these existing work requirements to help get more folks back into the labor force, working part-time, and doesn't apply again to parents. I know that was a long-winded explanation, but I think it's important because that deal exists right now, and President Biden just won't go along with it.
We have a couple clips here. Let's start with Speaker McCarthy explaining why work requirements are important to the Republican negotiators.
What work requirements actually do, help people get a job. Every data point shows that, and it helps people move forward. So the public wants it. Both parties want it. The idea that they want to put us into a default because they will not work with on that is ludicrous to me.
And you're talking about SNAP. What program are you talking about specifically?
Look, we're talking about all the programs because it helps people get into a job. And what does it mean when somebody gets in a job? They get better pay. They're able to buy their houses, but it also helps our supply chain.
And here is President Biden at a press conference on Wednesday. This was the comment that he made that was referenced earlier in the show, seeming maybe to open the door to some work requirements while ruling others out.
I'm not going to accept any work requirements that's going to impact on medical health needs of people. I'm not going to accept any work requirements that go much beyond what is already. Well, I voted years ago for the work requirements that exist, but it's possible there could be a few others, but not anything of any consequence.
Kim, how do you read that statement from the president? He's ruling out work requirements on health programs, but maybe there could be something, but nothing of consequence. I mean, is he really opening the door there? Or is he saying that maybe he'll try to find some way to give Republicans a fig leaf?
He left it open a crack, I would say. And by the way, that crack ought to be more than big enough to run through with the provisions Kate just mentioned. I mean, really, the proposals that have to do with SNAP, with food stamps, and with TAMP are so minor, so negligible as to almost not count. Okay. I mean, look, any changes are good, particularly the changes to the temporary assistance for needy families, which Kate mentions is just an outright scam. The real money, the real savings is in doing some sort of Medicaid change. And by the way, Republicans are not giving up on that. You know, it's one thing for the president to say, no, never, I'll never do it. Then again, this was the same White House that, again, 10 days ago said, I'm not even going to negotiate with you on any changes. We're going to pass a clean debt ceiling or nothing. So this is a process that we still have to go through. I think that nonetheless, the president's statements, minor as they were, set off such a backlash among liberals. And this is a problem the White House is dealing with. It's been the story of the Biden White House, which is this president on his own probably would be willing to make some deals with the Republican Congress. Progressives are insane. They don't want any deal making whatsoever. And he continues to cater to that flank of his party.
But what is the Republican strategy here then, Kate? I mean, is it to take this issue to the public and have some confidence that the work requirements they're proposing will be seen as reasonable and popular? And I would point to an April referendum, an advisory question on the ballot in Wisconsin. And here it is, a yes vote supported advising the state legislature to require able-bodied childless adults to look for work in order to receive taxpayer-funded welfare benefits. And that passed with 79.6% of voters saying yes. And so, Kate, I mean, do you suspect that that's what McCarthy is thinking here, that this will be a focus for the Republican negotiators? And if we get down to the wire on the debt ceiling, you can take that in a speech, you can take that on the road. These Republican congressmen going home to their districts can make the argument that this is what they are for. And maybe then Democrats and President Biden will feel some pressure to move from their negotiating position.
Yeah, Kyle. I mean, I think he has the political high ground. Joe Biden voted for 1996 welfare reform, and that included work requirements on single mothers, which is a much tougher political thing to sell than what we're talking about here today. We're talking really about trying to deal with parents too, but men who are really out of the labor force and not working. But to your point, it's an 80% polling issue in most places, and that crosses demographic categories, similar to the child tax credit when it was made into a universal cash entitlement. That didn't command the political support that its proponents expected. So this is a good political issue for Republicans. It also would show that they can get something done. So McCarthy said, we won't pass a clean debt ceiling. I agree with Kim that they shouldn't fold on the Medicaid work requirements. But I do think even if they just got the minor changes to food stamps and cash benefits, it would be progress that they could build on. It would be an agenda that they could expand out on. I do think, though, while we're talking about the politics, I think one lesson here that Republicans might learn is that they exempted all parents from their work requirement proposals. And they did that because the moderates in their conference were uncomfortable defending that political territory. But it has not softened the political attacks at all. Democrats are still accusing them of taking food out of kids' mouths. And so you might as well do the right thing. And for instance, some people have kids in school for 20 and more than 20 hours a week. And it's good for children to live in houses where parents are gainfully employed. So again, I think that we're talking about issues where Republicans really can explain what they're trying to do to voters and win. And that's why I think they've held out this far. And I think they will get something from Biden on this subject.
But Kim, do you think that public opinion really matters here? I mean, I know a debt ceiling fight is different than a government shutdown, but my analysis, I think, is informed by previous battles over shutting down the government and government funding, where it seems to me part of what matters is who gets blamed and who is viewed as being unreasonable and intransigent versus who really wants to try to get the deal done here. And so, I mean, I get that this is a negotiation between the parties who are physically in the room, Kevin McCarthy, President Biden, the aides and the staff that they bring with them, the other members of the House that might be in on these talks. But it's also kind of a public relations battle, no?
Yes. And the reasonableness point that you made is why I believe the White House has been more on the defense lately. And what I believe was one of the smartest things that the Republicans did when they passed that bill a couple of weeks ago, which was to bring their party together and choose a number of items that really are eminently reasonable. Okay. Most Americans understand that there is a debt problem. Most Americans understand that Washington has been spending way too much money and that we have to do something to tighten those budgets. Most Americans understand that we really should not be holding money for a pandemic that's been over for a long time. Clock back. Most Americans, as you noted from that election in Wisconsin, when you ask them the question, hey, should able bodied men who don't have children have to work 20 hours a week to get government benefits? They all say yes. It's just a really unifying issue. And so I think you combine that with the fact that it's Republicans who are the ones that have actually passed a bill to raise the debt ceiling at this point. Democrats have refused to take it up in the Senate. The White House has refused to negotiate. And if you look at the polling, there's generally broad support for doing something here to deal with debt. So I think this is why you see the White House moving a little bit, because the Republicans, and by the way, this surprises even me, are actually doing a pretty good job on the PR front.